There it is. Okay. There it is. You might all have to push a button now on your screen. Okay. Woo. Made it through some of this. So what I'd like to do now is just to speak a little bit about from my experience and some of what I wanted to share about to get us started. Again, as I was saying earlier, much of what we look at for today is something that comes from riots and protests, marches, and really a refusal to be made silent. And what does that mean to each of us? You know, we have a privilege today to be able to live the life that we do, to have the quality of life that we do, because of something that happened in the past. And had that not happened in the past, had there not been these movements and people who were courageous enough to speak up, our world would look very different. Our lives would look very different. And I think we always have to take a moment and appreciate that. And even I appreciate, Phoenix, how you also recognize the land that you're on. And we are on Ohlone land here in San Francisco that is now called San Francisco. And it's really looking at, okay, at least know that that's part of our journey, that somehow that land that belonged to someone else was colonized. And much of what I want to talk about here is we could go back and show a lot of anger and frustration, which I think is valid and is worthy to experience, but that then to move through that, because here we are today. The way that we make change is maybe from the fire and energy of our frustrations of the past and what has happened, but then to channel that into a laser-like focus so that we can think about what would be my mission? What would be my direction? And that is something that might be different for each and every one of us. It might be an artistic expression. It might be through being an activist, a social activist, conscious activist. It might be through tending a garden. It might be reaching out into communities. So whatever that might be, I feel like it's helpful to remember why are we doing it and to remember where that comes from. A similar fight, but to the Pride movement and the LGBTQQI plus movement, of course, has been the movement to get to the place where we can say all Black lives matter. And I think every one of us are able to honor and say that and appreciate why we've come to the point to even say that out loud. And that today marks a day of freedom and liberation that happened in 1865. And as some of you know, the history of this was first proclaimed on January 1st, 1862, that Black slaves were to be freed. Black people who were enslaved were allowed to become free. But the information, some say, didn't make it to these other places like Texas. Some say it made it, but the people in Texas didn't want to honor it. And it wasn't until 1865 when actually troops marched into Texas and said, hey, this has been a proclamation that you got to stop doing this. So it's interesting to see in history, the human attachment to not wanting to create change, because what does that mean? Where am I going to lose out? I want to keep what I have. And so I'll resist change in order to open my eyes wider, So that's been an interesting thing, just to see that in history where that's happened. So I'm grateful that we can see that it's a little bit different today. Of course, we have still a long ways to go. And I hope that we can continue with conversations like this to think, where can we get to when we all kind of keep our eyes open, our hearts open. I feel like I can't help but to also just touch on recognizing where there has been the power of a white supremacist structure and what that has done in our world. And once again, I don't want to necessarily spend the time to talk negatively what people should have done, what they didn't do, what they could have done, even though that certainly I have spent time in conversation with people about that. But it's thinking about, this has been a behavior that has basically been ongoing since maybe the beginning of time, where this colonial-like, or this king of the hill, or I'm going to power over on top of you so I can feel better. that this has simply been, unfortunately, human nature. But where can we imagine through some kind of practice that we could channel a higher nature? And that certainly was something for myself with the practice of yoga that I've seen possible. And it's only when we can really pause and imagine a change can that happen. All right, so what I'd like to do now, thank you for being here again, everyone. I'd like to actually propose some questions. And I'm going to go back just briefly to this screen because it's a longer question. And I'll throw this out to anyone on the panel that would like to start. So the first question here says, what has been your experience as an LGBTQQI plus individual? Very general, very broad. So I want to let it be that way to leave it as an open floor, but also to let you speak about, if you want, gender fluidity freedom that we now have today, or repression that we've experienced, environmental influences, cultural norms, and pressures. So I'll leave this up for another moment to let the panel kind of reflect on this. And then I'd like to see who would like to share. Okay, does someone on the panel feel ready? I can go ahead and move this slide. Okay.
Just ladies first. Me?
I mean, if you want.
No, you can start.
I can share.
Okay, Phoenix is going to step forward. Thank you, Phoenix. No, we're all like, you? I don't know, you? Yeah. Go ahead, Phoenix.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very religious family and was kind of brainwashed, throughout my teens that homosexuality was unnatural and immoral and some sin. So when I went to college, that's when I started to come out. And I had a lot of internalized homophobia, a lot of religious brainwashing. So I definitely was fighting with myself for many, many years in my coming out process, trying to become straight. And eventually I was suicidal and I dropped out of college, and was just really going through a hard time. My mother kicked me out of the family when I was 20. I was on my own. So it was a very, challenging journey coming out in my 20s, a lot of acting out, a lot of substance abuse. Um, and it took a very long time for me to undo this brainwashing, all of the societal, religious, familial, cultural brainwashing about homosexuality being wrong or immoral. So it was with a lot of therapy, a lot of like moving to the West Coast, hanging out with different people who had more progressive ideas, a lot of therapy, finding a spiritual community of Buddhism, where people were more open, they were openly gay members, they were a much more loving attitude towards queer people. So it was a very, very, very long process for me to really come to the place where I could celebrate being who I am and being queer. And then I think it was in the last decade of my life that really been exploring gender identity. And back when I came out, I don't even feel like being non-binary was an option. So there were trans people, yes, there have always been trans people in history, but there wasn't the languaging, when I was in college, around they, them pronouns and other things. So I, was struggling with gender norms my whole life. And it was really in my 40s when I started to meet a bunch of young queer trans folks, where suddenly there were all these new possibilities for gender, like a whole galaxy of gender possibilities. And that's when my mind, which had been so boxed into like there's a binary of he or she, that's it, maybe you cross over, but my mind just kind of went ding and really expanded. But again, I was still brainwashed into this binary. So it took me many, many years of like wiring and unconditioning myself before I was able to come out as non-binary myself. So I don't even know how many years this has been, maybe 5 years, but it's also been a journey through that. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I am very, very grateful and proud to be who I am now. And I'm also incredibly fortunate to be living in the Bay Area because as an adult, I lived in many homophobic countries all over the world, and in parts of the rural U.S. where I did not feel safe or welcome to be who I am today. So really my good fortune to be in the Bay Area, and a lot of gratitude for all the people who came before me, who paved the way, and a lot of gratitude to the young people. I really feel like the young people are leading the way with gender these days, and we can learn a lot from them. So they are probably at the place where they are now because of all the work that came before them, and now I kind of really look to the young people to keep leading us on. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Phoenix. That was awesome. I do also like to appreciate the young energy and the young folks that sort of help stimulate us, that can catch on. Maybe we did some of the work that brought them here, but it's also good. Then we remind them what we've done. Hey, y'all, remember what back when I was your age?
That's right, Sonny.
Yeah.
Don't forget back in the good old days.
Jesse, did you want to go ahead and answer anything from that?
Yeah, Phoenix, thank you so much. Like that sort of brought back a lot of memories. Like I came out like in the early 90s. So just thinking about that time, that was when AIDS was like when it became a pandemic. So
It's fine. This is fine because it's on Jesse. Yeah.
Camera.
Thank you. Yeah.
So just sort of coming out in that militancy was eye-opening. Like I grew up in Southern California, so it's like very laid back. We didn't really talk about these things. And I didn't come out until I was 18, came out with a vengeance. Tried being straight, but like both my girlfriend and I realized, yeah, you're not bisexual. You are, in fact, a homosexual. You like men. And, of course, then promptly contracted HIV, which I've been living with since the age of 19. So that's been part of it. That's been part of the journey and part of my queerness. And then I moved up here, and it was just sort of like a deep dive, like, oh, this is what queer means, and like ACT UP, and like the company I danced with was all queer men, most of them HIV positive. And it was just so refreshing because in college when I was trying to get my degree, we didn't really talk about being queer. It was sort of like, we understood it, but it didn't, you didn't dance. You danced like romantic duets with women. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. So moving up here and like dancing with men, like sort of openly and like expressing who we were, was a real revelation and a shock. And then like later on, like sort of being introduced to the intersections of race, like how that plays into it, like, and realizing quite often when I was working with other companies, I was frequently the only person of color dancing. And sometimes the only queer, which is kind of surprised me. Like I'm in San Francisco, I moved here to be amongst my people. But yeah, I was like, wow. So yeah, like realizing sort of how those intersections all like play together, and like sometimes in interesting ways, sometimes in super awkward, uncomfortable ways. And Phoenix, when you mentioned growing up in a religious family, my parents weren't super religious, but whatever, I grew up Catholic. So I'm aware of that sort of homophobia that is rampant in the church. And so when I came out, I was like, fuck this, sorry. But I'm done. I can't go and worship at a church that tells me that I'm wrong, that I am going to burn in hell. So like later, but sort of much later on in my life, I started going to a queer church, which was again, like, what? Like I walked into the space and they had a huge banner that said, a home for queer spirituality. I was like, I never thought I would see those two words together, but I was like, what? Amazing. And sort of their approach, everything's like, we use like, someone went through the Bible and they changed all the pronouns so that they were gender neutral, which I thought was amazing. Like, wow, this is cool. And they talk about things like homosexuality in the Bible. It does exist. There are certain passages that are like obviously like super queer, but whatever the establishment wants to tamp it down and not sort of not bring that up. But like really beautiful passages about like same-sex love, like people who were non-binary or gender non-conforming. So yeah, it's all in there. And so like for a church to actually bring that up, like, hey, by the way, Jesus was not white. He's not this blonde white figure that that you see on like above everyone's dinner table. No, Jesus was probably super dark, had kinky hair, but, and actually, I remember I brought that up, like it was some like Easter maybe, and like on the altar they had a picture of white Jesus, and I brought it up like, excuse me, Jesus was not white, and the person who made the altar like went off on me. I was like, really? We all know Jesus was not white. I'm simply pointing it out to you. But yeah, like, and eventually I left that church because of white fragility, because the pastor yelled at me. I'm like, what? Like for doing something you asked me to do as a person of color, you want me to do all this labor for you? So like, I can't take this anymore. So like, I'm waiting for like a change in leadership when I can go back and be with my church family. But right now, I'm like, I can't. So it's exhausting, like that, the intersection of race, like when that comes into it. Like I get that at work a lot. Like it's, you know, like the power, like the people, the higher ups are all white. And the people of color are down here. And like, we're fighting so hard to like dismantle that. Like, even though they know they should be doing it, it's like, I have to point this out to you again. Like this is a product of white supremacy, of colonialism. I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired. So, and I wanted to ask you, what does the second Q stand for? I know one is query, is a question.
Question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's something too. I want to thank you, Jesse. Just that idea of how language has worked. And I loved how you said, you know, seeing queer and spirituality, you never thought you'd see together. And how Phoenix also spoke about, you know, new words. I spoke a lot about this with my partner, Fox, that so much of how we understand ourselves is through language, and that the human experience and human beings are evolving very quickly and changing, but our language has sometimes been slow to catch up to all of that. So to be able to find those new words or new ways to identify is really in a lot of ways like our responsibility to be able to utilize those, and not to think, you know, oh, these are some fancy new words, but we're attempting to find new ways to express what it means to have this human experience, and it keeps diversifying.
Well, it's that whole like sort of converse, like you know, they them, the use of they them. Like, I mean, I have this discussion. My partner is just so resistant. Like, it's a plural. I'm like, no, we can point to like instances where in the English language, they is a singular. The usage is singular. So it's not a grammatical thing. It's just your sort of recalcitrance to like acknowledging someone's gender, you know, like their gender identity.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, you know, and he is older than I am. So there's a lot of like, really, I have to explain this to you.
And sometimes I feel like that we do, but at the same time, like you said, it can be exhausting. So for those of us that have that new information, it's like, how else is it going to get across if we're not sharing it? But at some point, it's like if we're always the ones doing that kind of work, that becomes, it almost feels it's putting us back into this place where we're already oppressed, you know, from the experience, and then it feels oppressive again to be the educators. But yeah, that's why we need something like yoga and dancing and shake it off. And to be in like-minded community. Gautam, I'd love for you to chime in, and I'm going to try to scoot this a little bit closer to you.
Phoenix and Jesse, thank you both for sharing your life experiences, and definitely align with both of you in terms of the gratitude for everything that we have experienced in the past that's allowed us to even be comfortable with saying that we are gay, or you know, be a part of the Bay Area has been a gift to me. My experience personally, I mean, I knew I was gay from a very young age, and culturally I grew up in India, and I knew innately that I didn't want to live there because of India is very close-minded in many ways. But I was fortunate where I could come here and then move here. But on a personal level, I was blessed where family, friends, yes, maybe they never understood, and I can embrace that, but it was accepted. And, you know, my sexuality wasn't really an issue, and never really has been. But I think, so I grew up feeling somewhat comfortable. I think the challenges arose again around race and homosexuality when I was in the Bay Area. And it wasn't that I'm looking at the Bay Area negatively, but even within the gay community, I felt, there was segregation between race, and then there was, size and body and those images. And I feel that often that was where I felt a little bit more put aside. But what I have done is I've used that, as you said, to my advantage and sort out ways to empower myself and grow. And I think the mantle that I've chosen to take on, whether personally, is always push or celebrate expression. And as you said, new ways of language, or even as we're learning and stumbling as human beings and continually evolving, just supporting more and more. And yes, today it's about Juneteenth and honoring emancipation of slavery, but it's whether it's feminism or anything, or expression of anything. I'm always trying on a personal, doing my bit to put that word out there, from education, expression, and in that way also embracing, I'm saying, calling it the far right, polarizing opposite, because I think we live in a world where we're always going to have duality. And just as we have a more progressive mindset or a DNA that's going to be pushing, we're going to have to embrace that's the balance. So I think the larger question that I live with every day is, how do I walk my talk, but also be open to hearing that perspective, because it takes two hands to clap. So that's me.
Thank you. Well, speaking of which, would anybody from our guests, whether you're on Zoom or here in the space, want to answer anything about that question? I'm going to remove the spotlight for all of us here. Feel free to chime in. Anybody at home? Oops. Or on IG Live. Even in the chat, you're welcome to place things in there. If you're not able to ask it directly on screen, feel free to type in a question or thought or any response to any of those things in the chat. And I'll just continue to leave that open. All right.
And something that Gautam mentioned, which is about polarization, and like super aware that you can't not find yourself embroiled in it, because it's like in the virtual space, and like that's the worst place to be polarized, because there's no reaction. And it's like, this is concrete, like my opinion is all, so there's no discourse. But just sort of like someone, it was a post or something, like someone said, well, why should we respond to people who are like on the right with facts? Because they don't listen to facts. They don't listen to knowledge. They don't acknowledge things like, oh, the virus is real. We have proof it's actually happening. But then they refuse to get tested. They refuse to get vaccinated or to wear masks. I'm like, well, how do you respond to that? It's like, it's very frustrating.
Agreed. Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'd be curious to hear other people's approaches to this. And I know for myself, one of the things that's helped is like recognizing, almost like Gautam, you were talking about, we will always have this world of duality. And there's no way around it. While we are in this human body, we are bound by this experience to be dualistic. There's always going to be a right. There's always going to be a left. There's always going to be a high. There'll always be a low. The pendulum will swing to the right and it will swing to the left. So reminding myself that there is this constant fluctuation of all experiences, and almost like to stop being surprised, to stop being surprised when something is completely different than I thought. Even when it is like a close friend who maybe thinks a little differently than I do,
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
just a little, and to just be like, you know what, can I make room?
Mhm.
What can I do to make room and space, rather than to say, you're not supposed to be here. That thought version isn't supposed to be here, because actually, what does that sound familiar like? You know, that sounds like that was said to us.
Right.
We're not supposed to be here. The choices or the lifestyle or our identity maybe doesn't fit the comfort of somebody else's expression. So instead of keeping the ping pong ball going back and forth, like I often talk about when I reference things like this, it's like, okay, how can I just hold that ping pong ball for a moment? Even though I want to throw it back with a pretty hard force, how can I hold it for a moment? And what happens if I send out a ripple of compassion, a ripple of understanding, rather than, you know, a ripple or a bouncing back of that same energy? And that takes work, you know, and that's where, rather than take the work of how can I change their mind, it's like, how can I transform and transmute maybe some of that, the feeling that I'm holding and the heaviness of it, into something that will ripple out a positive vibration, a rainbow, if you will, so that that's what's coming out of me. And a phrase that I love that I learned through recovery work is attraction, not promotion. And so this idea that it's like being, and like Gandhi said, you know, being the change you want to see, rather than trying to change others all the time. It's like, okay, if I can just work on presenting and emanating. Same idea of like, you know, when someone gets to know you, they're like, oh, I didn't realize you were gay. You're all right. I mean, I've heard that. Or, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, such and such types of people could do such and such. I'm like, okay, then. Eliza, I see your hand's coming up. No, we cannot hear you yet, but I see you. I know, yeah, it looked like you were unmuted, but maybe you're.
Do you want to type chat?
Hi, what about now? Okay, sorry.
Yes,
Oh,
there we go.
great.
Thank you.
I was saying that also speaking out could be a very good space to be in for those kind of for like LGBTQ, because sometimes you're kind of the, so to speak, and maybe somebody who doesn't could hear from that point of view, right? Like you'll be like, because people who don't want to understand or don't have those people in their lives. So I remember hearing about this, like for Black Lives Matter, where sometimes because those people who don't understand like the left perspective in that community as much, or exposed to those kind of people, and so they just don't understand. So if you are in the middle, like, you know, I'm not I could tell them like, but I met, you know, but I know a lot of people like that, and maybe consider that it could be harmful to other people, and I think that helps a lot. So it kind of goes the same with like when they don't understand science. I don't know how to explain it. When there's like that, you know, for me it's a little hard because I'm on the other side, but I think for topic, being an ally, I think it helps a lot to speak out and let people know, like, actually that thinking is not right. Like I have a really good, pretty conservative in many ways, and but we're really close friends. So, and I've told them, you know, I'm like, no, this is not. It's like you can't think that way, you know, like no, like that's not correct, you know, and then explain to them in a neutral possible to why that is not the case. Sometimes it's hard actually to just, I think if we come from a place of like respect, even though they're not respectful of other people, they're more. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
Yeah, I think we're getting the gist, and it's, your connection is a little choppy, so I'm missing some, but I think some of it, what I was hearing is being able to speak up and to be able to be in kind of the eye of the storm, and to be able to I guess to have in your heart this idea of connection versus to separate. And so if you're coming from that place, what is that like? Phoenix, I saw your note that you're going to need to go soon, and I wanted to let you kind of chime in with any other thoughts before you do go. So please.
Yeah, you know, I agree with the inner work that we can all be doing in terms of, you know, responding in a way which feels connective and strategic. And I also feel sometimes that burden is really on the oppressed. You know what I mean? To be like, oh, well, you need to sound civil. Well, if you were not so angry and saying that, you know, I know I've spent a lot of my life really trying hard to have compassion and understanding for like the oppressors, the people who are doing oppressive things, blah, blah, blah. And at some point, I'm like, you know what? The compassion starts with me. And that starts with saying, ouch, that really hurts. And if I'm going to talk to you in a way which is like, ouch, that really hurts, and I don't like that, and it's kind of strong, you know, it's like I don't really want pushback on me or like any of my marginalized siblings for like, you know, being toned policed about like, oh, if we could just, you know, be a little more compassionate towards all these other people. Yeah, so I get the point, right? Like I've spent my whole life trying to do my work, and sometimes I'm like, this just takes away from the fact of people are being oppressed on a daily basis, and we don't need them to like work on their tone or like work on being more loving and understanding. It's like there's oppression going on here, like let's put an end to that. So that's what's coming up as I listen to some of this.
That is very good.
I just want to explain that not for people like you who've gone through it to be not. I'm saying like the allies needs to like do that step, you know, to connect. You know, I don't expect anybody who's gone through it to have any of that sort, because you've gone through so many guys who haven't had that kind of like oppression to speak up and be like, yo, no, allies to step up. That's what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? I hope you know, yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you. I'm gonna.
That does make sense.
Yeah,
but
Phoenix, it's you when you need to go. But I just want to quickly say thank you again for for being able to be with us, and I hope that we see you soon. And I also hope that I see you in the studio here with one of your groups. Phoenix was here at some point. Do you remember singing in the studio space? And I loved it. So I hope you come back, and would love to have you share with our community what you do, or for us to look at where you are and what you're doing and come to you.
Thank you so much for hosting these conversations. Good to be with you all today.
Very
thanks, Phoenix.
really
Bye.
interesting. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Gautam, did you have something you wanted to?
Well, just as Phoenix says and Eliza, but you know, I agree. It's like there's only we do get tired, and there is that frustration. And the question that I always get is, when can we get to a place where everybody takes responsibility and is okay with embracing a diverse point of view, where it doesn't get to a point where it's the fatigue and it's always the ones who are oppressed or the allies who are supporting the oppressed do have to be the, you know, morality police or the acceptance police or the awareness police, or, you know, why does that have to be policed? And then, you know, it goes back to, as you say, and I love Be the Change. I kind of hold on to that motto dearly, but then, you know, I've struggled with this all the time, this very question. And where I'm at is that it goes back to that, you know, when the tide rises, all boats rise.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, as I've matured, I've just tried to make that more about my own personal growth and what can I do for the collective consciousness, so that then eventually people can take responsibility. So that's how I approach it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mitigate the frustration, and sometimes I just want to punch a wall, but there is, and that's what I'd love to open up is, I mean, anybody have another perspective, but I do struggle with that frustration, and it comes back to a singular impact of, okay, it's just me doing the compassion work and doing this and embracing their point of view, but but it doesn't mitigate the frustration. But I would love for others to take responsibility.
Anyone at home, once again, or anybody here in the space, feel free if you're having thoughts that are getting stimulated by this and you have something you want to add as well. Eliza, thanks for chiming in, for being brave and stepping forward. Anybody else that feels inspired, please, happy to bring your voice in. Otherwise, it's going to be us just rambling on and on.
I just like something that came up is just everything that's happening around, like it seems to be like conspiratorial happening around Pride, like the group of men that was arrested, like who were like had ammunition and were deliberately going in to stir up trouble at a Pride celebration, or just all of the don't say gay laws that are being enacted right now, and anti-trans legislation. Like, what is this a plan? Like, are like they like in their cabals, like working on like, oh, let's do it during Pride when it'll be really impactful, when we can really screw with everybody. Like, that is frightening to me. And like, part of me doesn't feel like being loving. Part of me feels like, bitch, you want to throw down, let's do it. Like, I'm tired. Like, I'm really, like you said, like, must we always be like a conciliatory? Like, no, sometimes you just have to put your foot down and say no more, like Marsha P. Like, just saying, fuck it. Like, we have had enough, and we're going to express this. We're going to feel our rage. I just feel like that. Like, even with Pride this year, with the whole controversy around the police marching and then being disallowed and then being brought back in, like whatever, like behind the scenes machinations, like London Breed saying, oh yeah, sure, no problem, like to get their votes. Like, really? The board said, no, we don't want this. You make us feel unsafe, and this is dishonoring the spirit of this celebration. And here you are again. Like, really? Like all the destruction you're causing. So yeah, I'm at a point of rage. Like, rage is like, I have this conversation with my husband. Like, rage is good. Like, I'm filled with rage. I'm like, honey, calm down. You'll live longer. But I also see, like, yes, rage is power. It's this fire. Like, yeah, this is why Stonewall happened. This is why Compton's happened. Because people were fed up and they said, no more. You get out of our space. You respect us. And part of me feels like sometimes we're just too nice. Like if we, I just love, there was a t-shirt that said queers bash back. I love that. I mean, it's kind of wrong, but I also feel like, why not? Like, why not let them know that we're not snowflakes, we're not wilting. And if you prick us, we'll fight back. We're not going to just take it. Maybe it's also letting them know, like, this is our history. We have fought back. We fought for our rights, and we're going to do it again. And just being super vocal. Again, the oppressed doing most of the work, but it's like, but yeah, that came into my head. It's like, yeah, these guys were arrested. They were coming to do some harm to the queers. I'm like, oh my God. Or like even the Drag Queen Story Hour that got, they had some MAGA people come in to disrupt the story time and calling them groomers. Like, again, language. Like, you know what? We are not groomers. Like the parents are here. They are allowing their kids to be here. So I just like, what? Like, this seems so intentional, and I'm kind of afraid, but also enraged.
I mean, I think it's hard not to go there at times. You're right. I mean, this is part of our emotional makeup as a sensitive being, is that we're going to have a response to some of this, especially when it's against what feels like our nature. And so, yeah, this is where this energy has created movements and has made change. And I know in my lifetime, I haven't seen a whole lot of that. A lot of this happened, prior, right? A lot of for the LGBT movement, LGBTQQI movement, etc. But maybe we're upon another turning point where it's requiring us to get a little more frustrated, or a lot more frustrated. I think the pandemic alone, kind of squeezed a lot of us into thinking more philosophically, analytically, personally about how is the world impacting me?
Yeah.
And do I have any volition around this, or am I just passive, participant? So yeah, I think there's something to it. And the one thing I've always liked in a spiritual teaching is that it's, and I think it's words from Swami Satchidananda, who said anger is a valid emotion. It's not that we should dismiss that. Let that be a fire that we take out. But when that fire comes out, use it appropriately, but then don't let it burn you completely. And that's what often can happen with rage, is it just becomes all consuming. And not only have we lit the others on fire, but we've lit ourselves on fire.
Exactly.
And then everything burns down. And then, so when people have channeled, like Marsha P. Johnson, and like all those folks at Stonewall, and like hundreds of years of speaking up against being enslaved and tortured and all that's happening, is it's a voice that speaks up with anger and frustration, and then somehow gets channeled. And that's what I'm always curious about. Like, it's like that energy of that, it's filled with all the emotions, but then somehow it's either someone or something that then all of a sudden it becomes channeled. And this laser energy makes the movement. And I think it's all the bits along the way. It's not just the one person. Like, and I always had heard it, Marsha P. Johnson was the one who started Stonewall, but she has acknowledged, well, I actually showed up late.
Drag queen.
Right, I was still getting my hair done.
Yeah.
But it was still just a way to say, it comes from this buildup. Or Rosa Parks, it's like that wasn't just one moment in time where she was like, oh, I'm just going to go to the back, sit in the front and not go to the back. It was actually multiple things that happened, right? So we got to remember that. I think as we continue to go, that we're not just waiting for the one big moment, but that we're a bunch of little moments that are compounding, generating energy, force, power. But if we just get distracted, we get lazy. I think that's what a lot of the larger hands want, is for us to become distracted, to just get into consumer mind, to think about, oh, what I don't have and what I need more of, what I don't look like and what I should look like more. If we get caught up in so much of that, that to me is the distraction that confuses us. So what can we do to, like, okay, I am content. I am enough. I can still find my peace even when it feels like it's been stripped away. I know what I'm trying to cultivate because it comes from a knowingness that I've tapped into. And that to me creates an unstoppable force and a resilience that I think powers what we need to do. So any thoughts from there?
I mean, amen. I mean, you're right. I think what you said is that complacency is not going to get us anywhere personally or collectively. I mean, I think it's important to always align your values with what's going on into the world. And even though you feel that you're one little bit, whether it's a donation, an hour of your time, or speaking up, or sharing or educating people or helping wherever you can, it's not going to do anything, but it does energetically. It helps to gather steam around the transformation that is so needed for our evolution. And so I think what you said is important, that never should forget that, and always know that you are important and you are a Rosa Parks in the making, or a Marsha Johnson in the making. So never ever forget that. I think that's really important.
Anybody here having any thoughts? Spinning, churning? All right, I do see here Kinjal joining us here and just saying thanks for sharing. If I can share just a little bit about what you've added in here, she said you're not alone. Having the allyship and voice of heterosexual folks is as important. You shouldn't have to fight alone. All emotions are valid, but loved. That you quoted Swami Satchidananda. Oh, thank you. Being careful, burning yourself. Sorry, I'm reading sideways. Careful burning yourself with that fire. Exactly. Thank you, Kinjal. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on that as well. Let me go ahead and shift to another question that I had on the slides here, and let's just see if this feels useful for us to peek at. So I'm going to just show a couple questions, and you guys let me know what you might want to touch on. What can we share about our own living truth that enables us to stand here today? I feel like we've heard quite a bit. Yeah. So this might be a good one. What practices or ways do you maintain a healthy, positive outlook, given life can sometimes feel like it's not moving or learning fast enough? Yeah, I'll stop there. So so we'll get maybe to the action part of this talk and thinking about what are some of the things, what actions can we do amongst all this? Okay, we recognized and pointed at maybe some of the problems, the frustrations, rage, feeling like nothing's going to change maybe. So what can we do? What are some of those things that maybe you all have done or you've seen or some of you can think of?
Well, for me, it's always about that sense of community, like being in affinity with people, like people who are like you. It takes you out of that. Oh, I'm the one dark spot in this like sea of light. Like that is so important to me. Like I've come to see it more strongly now. Like I've always sort of gravitated towards, oh, my people. I'll go to that corner where all the Asians are hanging out because whatever, we speak the same language or like we think the same thoughts. I mean, not that we're monolith, but like we have similar experiences. So yeah, like finding that group and like and knowing that I'm not alone and that we are building this community and we're becoming this larger voice. And it's that ripple effect, like, oh, then they're going to take it out. Like maybe it's someone who is not accustomed to this or is not so well versed in that sense of community or affinity. But maybe they're going to take that and say, I'm going to build this here and create these safe spaces where this voice, this thought is held and becomes this larger thing. So yeah, that's especially like in my artistic practice. I'm like, I want all Asians and I want them to be all queer. And that is just makes my heart full. I'm like, when I get that, you know how hard it is to find queer Asian dancers, because they're not always sort of forthcoming, whatever culturally, like maybe they're like recent immigrants and like they're still finding themselves. So it's kind of hard to find queer Asian dancers, but they're out there. But again, it's like labor. I'm like, oh man, you have to bring them. Like it's like fishing. I'm like, here, come dance with me. So yeah, like that's things like that they're small things, but I feel like in the larger scale, like creating that sort of representation, like for other queer Asians to see that, like it can be done and we can talk about things and we don't always have to talk about being Asian. Like we can, this is such a rich tapestry. Like, yes. And then other people can see it like, okay, yeah, they're all Asian, but they're talking about whatever, like something topical. Yeah, we're a lot more complicated than that. So I relish that. I try and encourage that in my interactions, in my art making. Like, yeah, you know what? I don't really feel like talking about being Asian today, or in this particular instance. But like definitely feel like, oh man, that's why they've tagged me. It's like, oh, you're the whatever the POC voice here. I'm like, really? I'm not like some marketing thing for you to like tap into. It's like, oh, we can get more Asians into the audience. Like, no, I'm not your whore that way. So, I mean, I'm a whore in other ways, but come on. Like, I wanted to be on my, like my call.
Good.
Well, I mean, I think like I started the conversation, I think my own spiritual growth and doing inner work has allowed me to just become more inclusive and aware as a human being. And I think where I'm at is I've always find myself gravitating towards promoting like meditation, yoga, spirituality as tools that are pretty democratic and help in many ways answer that question and just by nature of how they're designed, open people up to, embrace parts of themselves and their shadow, as well as then embrace diversity. And a couple of years ago, as part of a community that brought that to Golden Gate Park, and then I continued to teach. And so what I do is, try and keep my practice so that I can keep my sanity and frustration and, not feel so burnt, but then also engage within the community wherever I can to promote the benefits without, pardon the expression, Bible beating of just spiritual meditation, yoga, and all those health benefits to take it to a singular place. That's at this point in my life, that's what I feel will help the world embrace us, embrace each other. I also feel in my head and heart that evolutionary, as humans, we're going through broader brain, nervous system integration. I'm a scientist, but just what I feel intuitively. So I just feel it's pretty called to just promoting the benefits of yoga and spirituality without being dramatic about it.
Very good. Well, that's certainly one of my main practices too. So we know that that's some of us speaking to the choir, but also, I appreciate Jesse's journey too, having that being a significant background for me with movement and dance and being an Asian dancer and gay, and coming into that world feeling like I didn't know how to speak about that at first, but then thankfully dancing with Yoga Performance Group, who I feel like that was a great mentor on one level, but really coming into my own as speaking as an Asian American has been challenging for different reasons. But grateful to have this panel and for us to be able to, speak our truth and to share. And certainly these are just our thoughts and our experiences, and we intend to be conversation so we can all be stimulated to think about what does it mean for our own journeys along the way. I think whenever we think there's like a one size fits all, or there's only one way to do it, is when we get into trouble. And when we can really see that, each of us is going to have a certain inclination based on our culture, our race, our gender, our skin color, where we grew up, when we grew up, how we grew up. And that gives the beautiful and colorful diversity that I wish we would learn to celebrate more rather than be afraid of. And where in our own lives, maybe we can start looking, am I resistant when I see something that's different than me? Where do I kind of clench up and I start to think, well, that's not right. And to recognize on one level, this is very natural. We're human. We're just like the cells in our body that also go towards like areas. And we're very simple in a lot of ways as that goes. But we also have this beautiful capacity to shift from the survival thinking, the limited spaces, to go more towards an unlimited realm where we can see, oh, there is a possibility for peace. There is a possibility for all of us to be able to like each other and to get along. We just don't know how to do it. But if we look at our circles and we can see, where have we been able to create peace? Look at your families. Where was there once maybe a chasm that got resolved, or your friendships or your relationships, and we were able to make a difference. And that, to me, whenever I see this happen, I'm like, okay, that's the message that it's possible. At one moment we were at odds, and then the next moment we were able to see each other as one. So I want you to each take a moment in these last few minutes just to think about what could be an action step for you. And if you feel inspired, put it in the chat or say it out loud. But at the very least, say it to yourself, like what could be that action step, whether it's thinking about language. When I hear the words non-binary or intersectionality, what does that create? Is there an openness, a curiosity, or is there, some feeling like I don't understand and can I learn? What else might be in your heart space right now? Just let that move around. We'll take a short 30 seconds or so of silence just to be here in this space. And then if anything you feel called, let's speak about it or put it in the chat. So action steps or anything in the heart space. Om. If your eyes were closed, you can let them slowly open. And if any of you have any thoughts or anything that you want to share as we begin to close, feel free. I'll share that Kinjo wrote from scarcity to abundance, to approach from curiosity, and to check my subconscious biases. Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Kinjo. I'll quickly glance here in the chat if there's anything else that were offered. I think this might have come a little while ago, but I'll share with it from Sita. You all should be celebrated on being so courageous and authentic to your true self and coming out. How do you fuel up your courage and in listening to your inner voice? Okay, yeah, I think we kind of went through that earlier. So thank you, Sita. And then Anjali, yeah, thank you for sharing. She said, this was lovely. Thank you for being so open, sending love to you all. Thank you, receiving it. Mwah, sending love to you and your family. If anybody else has anything to share, otherwise, we'll go ahead and begin to close. Oh, I see Fox. To accept that all the people of, I'm thinking POVs, you mean POCs, probably POCs, people of color represented today are valid, and we may require all of them at different times and in different contexts in our own lives. Maybe encounter. Anyway, thank you. Maybe sometimes we need to disengage or do the inner work, but other times maybe we need to channel that righteous anger and be confident enough to confront bigotry and ignorance. That's right. Points of view. Okay, thanks, Fox. Well, thank you all for being here and for being with me as I manage the technology. And for those of you here in the space that were live with us, thanks for making time to come down into the studio. Again, this was our 6th Empower Hour, Living Truth, Living Proof. And next month, July, the topic will be something around Independence Day, but it's not going to be exactly that. And if any of you have any thoughts, I'm sort of spinning some ideas around what does that really mean? And I think we hear a lot about this. Independence for whom? And what does it mean to be a patriot? So there's some thoughts that are coming together around that, but I'd love it if you want to be involved and just share with others. Until then, thank you again so much for being a part of this. Thank you to Jesse. Thank you to Gautam, who stepped away for a moment. And thank you again, Phoenix, who had to go. And once again, thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, really grateful. I'm happy that we share this part of what Mukunda Studio does. Okay, all the best. Thanks, Anita.
Thanks.
Thanks.
An eye opener for me. Thanks.
Oh, good. Glad you made it.
Bye.
We love Gautam.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.